Can you get DKA from eating a keto diet? This is one of the most classic diabetes myths that sometimes gets perpetuated. It drives me bananas. So here's the situation, just to lay it out, right? So the ketogenic diet, of course, very low carb diet. It was developed for people with epilepsy about 100 something years ago. And it works really well, right? The technical keto diet is like 80% fat, 15% protein, 5% or less carbs. And so we're talking very few carbs. Your body starts using ketones as the main energy source because they can function as an energy source and you can live your life, right? Here's the thing. People then are like, oh my goodness, DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. That means the keto diet is dangerous because yes, they are also ketone bodies, but the difference is not so much the ketones. It is the etiology of where the ketones come from. So where do they originate? Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. And I've got a lot of good questions that have come in over the past few weeks. And I wanted to go through them and answer because I know there's a lot of things on people's minds when it comes to blood sugar management. There's some good hypotheticals. There's some around nutrition. And there's just a couple myths that I feel like have to be dispelled and busted because there's a lot of misinformation floating around in the land of diabetes. As you know, I'm here to keep it real, to keep it 100, and to make sure that you have all the best knowledge so you can arm yourself with it. So your blood sugars are great and you can live life unrestricted. So that being said, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The eighth one I'm going to say is wild. I'm saving it for the end because it's absolutely crazy. And it's a question that no one's ever asked before. I've never talked about before. I don't think I've ever even had a discussion about it before. So I'm very excited to go into that one. But the first one I think is a very real question. And it's someone who said, hey, how do people live with this for years and years without going crazy? I've been diagnosed for about a year and I can't do it anymore. I'm so frustrated. I'm so burnt out. And this is something I know I've had episodes specific to burnout in the past, but for diabetes, especially if you're type 1 and you're dealing with the ups and downs, the highs, the lows, I'm exhausted, I have a low blood sugar at 3 a.m., I have a high blood sugar at 3 a.m., all these different things that are going on. There's a couple things I want you to remember, I want you to think about. First things first, if you're kind of, for lack of a better term, half-assing it, I would highly recommend that you try to stop doing that and just put it just a little teeny bit more effort today than you did the day before, and then continue to stack that momentum day after day. And I've talked about habit formation on here. I've talked about changing and what might work well and what might not work well. But here's the thing at the end of the day to remember is if you have diabetes, especially if you're type 1, you have this for the rest of your life. And every decision you make theoretically will impact you. It may not impact you now as acutely, but it will impact you years down the road. And if the goal is to have a long, happy, healthy life, the high quality of life as well, you're going to want to make sure your blood sugars are as good as possible. You're like, Ben, of course, duh. But here's the thing. You're burnt out after a year. I remember it vividly about being about 9 years old. And I was like, I hate this. I'm done with this. I'm testing my finger every couple hours. I'm sick of dosing. I'm sick of taking injections. Like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. And you realize you have to, because what's the alternative? What is the alternative? The alternative is you feel like absolute garbage. You're dehydrated. You feel disgusting. The things you want to do, you don't feel like you're able to do them. It's going to be harder to build muscle. It's going to be harder to drop pounds. It's going to be harder to eat the foods you like. Everything is going to be more difficult if you just choose to neglect it and stick it on the back burner and pretend like it doesn't exist. If you're willing to put in just a little bit of effort to say, hey, I'm going to put in some structure into my life. I'm going to make sure I'm paying a little bit extra attention. I'm going to prep these meals a little bit more. I'm going to make sure I'm active. I'm going to make sure I'm doing the little things, getting the sleep, etc. Those things are going to stack up and they are going to make your life easier, which then makes it feel like, oh, I have this condition. I have to peep my Dexcom, or my CGM. I have to test my number. I have to take my insulin, whatever. But it doesn't feel like it's taking over everything. It kind of says, oh, I want to do this thing. I want to go hang out with my friends. I have a couple extra steps to do it. Take 45 seconds and now I can go do it. I think changing your perspective to that is, oh, there's a couple extra things I have to do, but it's not a big deal, versus, oh my God, this is taking over my life. That is something I would definitely try to remind yourself. And if you're thinking, hey, like my team is not helping me, I'm not getting support, I'm having to resort to social media to find support. You may need a new care team, and it's not a problem to switch care team. Our team is here from an educational standpoint. If you're like, hey, I need the blood sugar support, I need the exercise support, I need the nutrition support, I need to know what incarnation I'm doing, we're all here to help. We all have diabetes. We all have exercise backgrounds. We're all dietitians. We have your back. So if that's you, message me over on social, make sure that we can help you. But that is how to get through some of this burnout, is how can I make this a little inconsequential thing that I'm dealing with every day? And suddenly, boom, it doesn't seem like a big deal because I'm floating, my numbers are good, etc. This person says, I am struggling. I have type 2. I'm taking 2 to 3 shots per day of fast acting, 1 long acting shot per day. I'm nervous about eating, and everything I eat is rocketing my blood sugar to the moon. What do I do? So this is the situation again. Type 1, type 2 can relate to either one, especially if you're insulin dependent. You know, hey, I had this meal, my blood sugar went to the moon. I looked at food, my blood sugar went to the moon. It is not an abnormal thing. Now, on the flip side, it's not a great thing either, because of course, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, you're going to feel like garbage every time your blood sugar rockets to 250, 300, 350 plus, right? So you have to ask yourself, okay, when it comes to this, there's a few variables. There's the variable number 1, the carb counting, the nutrition assessment. Are you carb counting correctly? Because if you're not, it doesn't matter how good your dose is, it's not going to matter. So are you carb counting correctly? If you are, okay, check, move on to the next one. Is your dose accurate? Did your team say, hey, take X number of units per meal, regardless of what you're eating? Or did they say, hey, your insulin to carb ratio every 8 grams or every 10 grams or every 15, whatever they said, every X number of grams is equal to 1 unit, and you can do the math that way. That tends to be the preferred method, because to the life of me, I just do not understand why there are care teams out there. You get diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 or type 2, you're put on insulin. They say to you, hey, take 5 units per meal. Doesn't matter what you're eating. So you're telling me that I could eat chicken and broccoli and take 5 units, but I could also eat an ice cream sundae and take 5. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It fundamentally makes 0 sense. It is a flawed system that I think is absolute idiocy. Absolute idiocy. But regardless, if those 2 things on the checklist, if the carb counting is a check, okay, it's good. The dosing, insulin to carb ratio, okay, cool, I'm using a ratio, check. Something is off with one of the 2. It could be the dosing, it could be the timing of the dosing, could be what you're eating specifically, it could be how fast the carbs are hitting. That is where working with a registered dietitian is going to help you. And that's what's going to help demystify the situation as a whole. So I hope that helps a little bit. What is the impact of going MDI for a bit versus being on the pump? I've been on the pump, but I'm sick of it. I need a break right now. So it doesn't have to be. So a lot of people think, oh, if I get off my pump, my average, I'm making up numbers here for sake of simplicity. My average on the pump, I'm 141, and I'm going to go on to, injections, and I'm suddenly going to go up to 170. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. Because here's the thing, right? Your basal rate on your pump is going to be a little different than your basal rate on injections. But once you get past that, the rest of the short acting is pretty much the same. It's going to come down to the same principles of timing, carb counting, and amount. If you dose appropriately for your meals, your basal rate's on point, you don't have anything to worry about. There's nothing that's, holy cow, your blood sugars are going to be garbage. I have had plenty of patients, and that's just me. It doesn't count the rest of my team. I've had dozens of people on multiple daily injections, A1Cs in the 5s, not going low all the time, type 1 for decades. And they're doing amazing because they have it down to a science. So it does not have to have any sort of, oh man, I'm going to have this terrible transition, unless you just straight up don't do anything and you're super lazy. If you maintain the same level of, hey, I'm paying attention to my pump, I'm paying attention to my CGM, I'm dosing appropriately, I'm correcting appropriately, you maintain that same framework on multiple daily injections, I do not see a universe where you are having a problem. Maybe the first week as you're titrating stuff and you're going up and down and working with your care team on figuring out the system, maybe there you're slightly higher for a few days, and then you fall into a regular routine and you're totally good. I can tell you, as someone who took a pump break for about 2 months this summer, my blood sugars off the pump when I was on MDI were actually slightly better than they were on the pump because I was having so many pump problems with the sites. So let that sink in. And again, yes, do I do this? Absolutely. But on the flip side, as I'm saying, there are other people outside of me, dozens and dozens, that have said, hey, I'm going to do this on MDI and I'm going to do amazing. So I would not feel any sort of concern or threat or, oh my God, I can't do it. There's nothing there. Just keep the framework and you should be fine. Just make sure you have the transition support from your care team before you make that switch. What did you dose for? And I put in parentheses that food, because this is a question all the time. All the time. I could be eating, we were in Canada not too long ago. I was eating a beaver tail. It's fried dough there was icing on it and some candy topping on it. I'd split it with Amelia. But sometimes it'll be that. Sometimes it'll be a bowl of pasta. Sometimes it'll be a cupcake. Sometimes it'll be just something random. How many units did you take? It does not matter how many units I take. That is the wrong question to be asking. I say this from a place of love and a place of I want you to be able to ask the right questions to have amazing blood sugars for you, right? And so think about it. If I get a beaver tail, we'll use it as an easy example. I believe it was about 78 grams of carbs. Let's say I ate half of it, we'll just round up. That's 40 grams. If I happen to take 5 units and my ratio is 1:8, you should not be taking 5 units just because I took 5 units, because that is not your carb ratio. Maybe you have the same ratio and it happens to work out. But what if your carb ratio is 1:20 and you took 5 units? You could end up in a very bad place. On the contrary, what if your carb ratio is 1:3 and you took 5 units? You could end up in a very bad place. So asking how many units I take for something, it's irrelevant. It does not matter. It does not impact you. The question to ask is, how many carbs did you assess for that meal? Because then you can take your carb ratio and decide how many units you are going to take based off of that, assuming that you have the same type of thing, assuming that you carb count and assess similarly. When I do these videos, right, how many carbs are in blank? How do I break down blank? I do them so that you can see from my perspective as a dietitian, diabetes educator, person who's had it for over 26 years, what it takes to break that down to facilitate having great blood sugars when eating that meal. That's why I do it, because I'm not telling you I took 4 units. It doesn't matter. What matters is the carbs. What matters is the fat and the protein, because then hey, I have the actual stuff I need, and then I can apply it to my own life. It's the reason I do what I do. I promise. Promise. All right. Should you do intermittent fasting if you have type 2 diabetes? I think type 1, type 2 in this case, I'm not going to say that they're different. Of course, the conditions are different, but is it a different situation? Because people have asked about type 1 and doing, intermittent fasting. It's slightly different because obviously the insulin may or may not be there. But the caveat is, if your blood sugars will not go low while you're doing your 16 hours of no food, and you're not going to spike to the moon during your 8 hours of eating, and you're having quality choices, I don't see why intermittent fasting would be a problem. The key is just making sure your medication with your care team is set up in such a way that you're not going to fall off a cliff during that time you're not eating. Now, with people on insulin, it can be a little bit easier because they can say, hey, I'm going to, reduce my basal rate. They're on an insulin pump, or hey, I'm going to, adjust when I dose, or whatever it might be. If you're on oral meds, you may have to make a slight difference to the timing of the meds. And you may have to consider, okay, what am I eating specifically for this to ensure that I don't crash later on? So it's just a slight twist on how you would handle it if you're not on insulin. But again, you have to make sure with your care team that they are on board with it, because if they're not, then they aren't able to help you. They're not able to go through and say, hey, you're taking glipizide. What do we need to tweak? You're on a GLP-1. What do you need to tweak? What is the best range for blood sugars? This is a good one. So best range, of course, Dexcom defaults to 70 to 180 as in range. I don't think that's necessarily a bad range to have as like your default, right? There are some people that will have it all the way up to 200. I think that's a little bit much. I think 200 is a little bit it's a little dicey. Of course, think about A1C, right? 154 average is about a 7. So what everybody wants, the doctors, you got to get a 7. The next level is about a 180 mark, and that would be an 8. So to me, it's okay. You're hugging the 180 line. I don't really love that idea, right? It doesn't sit well with me. It's not something that I would want to have personally or for my patients, right? But on the flip side, okay, what would be a reasonable range to set as in range? I personally have my high bar set at 150. Now, I brought it down over the years. At first it was 180, then it was 160, then it was 150. Reason being, if I were to sit flat at 150 all the time and it never moved, my A1C would be 6.8, 6.9. Of course, that's not realistic, but that's what that would look like. And so I know if I hit 154, if I hit 155, I hit 152, I can then say, hey, do I need to intervene on this right now? Or do I not have to intervene on this right now? And that's a massive thing, because I would rather know that my number's trending up and know that I can intervene on it before, oh man, it's already 180, it's already 200, it's already 250. That can get a little bit daunting. From a notification standpoint, sometimes if you're a parent and you have a kid with diabetes, you might look and say, oh, I want them to be at 250. 250 is the bar where I get a little concerned because blood sugars are so volatile. That's a different story. But if you're an adult, I would say, at the highest I'd set it would probably be 180, maybe 200. If you're brand new to diabetes, 200 is okay. Give yourself a little bit of grace and time. But as you get deeper into it, I would say the closer and the tighter the control you can get, the better. 70 as a low bar, I think, is magnificent, because under that is technically low. But 80, some people do it at 80. If you're nervous about lows, okay, but I want you to start challenging yourself and try to bring it to 75 and then bring it down to 70. If you told me you sat between 70 and 150 all day, every day, your A1C is going to be incredible. You're going to be great. There are some people that do it. There's a lot of people that don't. I'm not there either, right? I'm not perfect at all by any stretch of the imagination, but I like having that 150 bar. So if I'm rising, I can intervene early. This is a good one. Can you get DKA from eating a keto diet? This is one of the most classic diabetes myths that sometimes gets perpetuated. It drives me bananas. So here's the situation, just to lay it out, right? So the ketogenic diet, of course, very low carb diet. It was developed for people with epilepsy about 100 something years ago. And it works really well, right? The technical keto diet is like 80% fat, 15% protein, 5% or less carbs. And so we're talking very few carbs. Your body starts using ketones as the main energy source because they can function as an energy source and you can live your life, right? Here's the thing. People then are like, oh my goodness, DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. That means the keto diet is dangerous because yes, they are also ketone bodies. But the difference is not so much the ketones. It is the etiology of where the ketones come from. So where do they originate? In the ketogenic diet, right? You're eating very few grams of carbs. So your body says, I need to get energy from somewhere. I can get it from the fat because you're eating a lot of fat. You're eating a lot of protein. Well, hopefully a decent amount of protein. And so because of that, hey, this fat's got a bunch of energy. I can use this as my main fuel source. And it's kind of like switching. You're in a hybrid car. Gas is, carbs. Fat is your electricity. You're flipping the switch to go to the gas, or not gas, I'm sorry, to go to the electricity, to go to the fat, right? And so now you're burning those as your main energy source. And that's okay. People do it all the time. But here's the thing. In DKA, it's the same ketone bodies, but they're stemming from lack of insulin, illness, infection, something that is pretty dramatic on the body that is forcing the body from a place of stress to say, holy cow, I need energy, help me. And so what does it do? It starts developing a ton of ketones really fast, then tie that into a high blood sugar, 240 plus, and then suddenly you can get into a really dangerous place very quickly. But notice, if you're on the keto diet, I remember being on the keto diet when I was in grad school and I would, pee on the stick and I would have, not large, I'd have usually moderate or small. I was eating a decent amount of protein, but probably more than the typical keto person. But regardless, right? I'm doing this. And from a blood sugar standpoint, I'm fine. I'm 120, 130. Yes, there's such thing as euglycemic DKA, which is when you're in range. That's usually SGLT2 inhibitor related, which is a medication that goes through, your urinary system. But the bigger thing here is where it came from. I was just eating in a keto fashion. I was hydrated. My number was fine. Everything was cool. I was peeing on ketones, meaning I'm in ketosis. That was what I wanted. Diabetic ketoacidosis is when there's a huge influx because of something external, typically stress on the body, infection, illness, no insulin, absence of insulin. You get the idea. That is a very different situation than I've got plenty of insulin on board. My body's not overly stressed, etc. So that's what I want to delineate here is, can you get it from eating a keto diet? Not very likely. Could you be on a keto diet and end up in it? God forbid. Sure. If your insulin pump shuts off, right? Sure. If God forbid you get really sick, but that's no different than if you're eating a bunch of carbs and God forbid your insulin pump comes off, right? So that's the big separation I want to make there. So don't feel like, oh my God, this is it. No, don't stress about it. It's okay. It's, it kind of is what it is. But if you're like, I really want to go keto, of course, work with your care team, work with your dietitian, make sure it's the right thing for you. But no, that independently is not going to put you into DKA. Now the fun one, and this one's such a good question. I've never been asked this either. If there was an experiment, like a lab, a research study for a type 1 diabetes cure, would you do it? Would you participate? And to me, it's a tough question. And I say this, for a couple of reasons, right? If it's a study, I've done a couple studies in my lifetime that I can think of that were legitimate studies. That was back when I was in grad school. But when it comes to studies for an experimental cure, I think it would have to come down to what are the potential risks, number one, and obviously, what are the benefits, but what is the mode of how this works? So for example, if you told me there's these studies going on right now, they're in different places, they're not, near where I live, so I can't be in them, but some of these Vertex studies, right? Some of these other studies with, stem cells and islet cells and transplants, and it would have to be to me, I wouldn't want to join it until after the first couple of phases. And this is just me personally, right? Because some of these things, we don't know what will actually happen. And so, yes, there's a chance that it cures your diabetes. You're in a great spot. But there's also a chance where a lot of these, people don't have insulin, but they're on these anti-rejection meds for a really long time. So cool, I don't have to manage my diabetes, but now I have to manage something else. So to me, that's kind of like a trade that I don't personally really like. But on the flip side too, there's always a risk in these studies, right? That's why they're doing studies. They want to make sure it's safe before they bring other people into it. And maybe I'm overly cautious. Maybe I'm not as much fun as you might think. But when I look at this, I would want to know, what are the potential risks? Is there, God forbid, a problem where, it could have really bad adverse effects? Could I get super sick? Could I, God forbid, die, right? Is there something that could happen in these studies where I have to say, is this a risk I am potentially willing to take to do this? And for a cure for type 1, it would really depend. It would really depend. And as much as everyone's like, we're really close, I don't think we're quite as close as people think. I really don't. And maybe I'm cynical, maybe I'm jaded because I've had this for 26 years. But when I was 7 years old, we'll have a cure in 5 years. 5 years later, we'll have a cure in 5 years. And, you cure it, keeps getting kicked down the road. But I think when it comes down to it, right, would I participate? It would have to depend on what it was. Is it a new kind of insulin, right? Is it the studies I did do? There were two. One of them was what is now the islet, the bionic pancreas system. It was the bihormonal system that had insulin and glucagon. Loved every minute of it, would do it again, absolutely. The other study I did was this experimental drug. I don't even remember what it was called. I was the first person in the country that took it, and I hope for the sake of whatever happened after that, no one else got a chance to take it. Because the whole point of it was basically supposed to, I don't know, like block absorption of carb. It was something funky. All I know is whatever it was supposed to do, for me, it did not work. Like, I just remember I had to drink a Boost, those, nasty protein shake type things. They're like 50 grams of carbs in them. To drink this Boost, I drank it. I couldn't take insulin for it because the whole point was to see if the drug would work. And then I had to just sit for like the next 6 hours and not do anything. And it was horrible because whatever it was, obviously I just ate or drank 50 grams of carbs. My blood sugar shoots up to, 350 and it just sits there and I can't do anything because that's part of the study until the protocol was over and ended. So at that point, I'm sitting there and I had a higher dose and higher dose. I kept coming back. It never did anything. It never worked. And so to me, I'm like, okay, this isn't working. Maybe it worked for someone else. I hope whoever did it after me, if anyone did, found it to work and it was great. But it was terrible for me. It was brutal. I hated every second of it. So I think the thing that I'm really trying to bring across here is it would depend on the risks. It would depend on the reward. It would depend on how far into the process is a phase 2 study, a phase 3 study. What are the possibilities of success? What would they say they're likely to find? Are there any weird side effects? And then I would have to make my decision. But I would say right now, if you were to give me a straight up yes or no, if I was on the two ends of the spectrum, right? And there's 0% chance of yes and 100% yes, I'd probably be at about 25%. A little cautious, but at the same time, it would depend on what it was. And it would have to be a long conversation with Amelia as well. But that is these questions. This was a good one. This is a really good set of questions. So I'm really grateful I got to do this. But with this, if you've got questions based on these answers, if you've got other questions you want me to answer, if you have diabetes, type 1, type 2, does not matter. A loved one has diabetes, whatever questions you've got, holler at me. Instagram, TikTok, @manofzeel, MANOFTZEEL. And if you're someone who's struggling from a blood sugar standpoint, you really want to just dive in, make it happen, get great blood sugars, and have them not just for now, but for years and years to come. My team and I are here to help. We all get it. Professionally, personally, we've got your back. We're here for you. So reach out, let me know how we can support you, and I will catch you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.